Hello and welcome to What's New with Austrian and Czech Jewish Genealogy. This is Randy Schoenberg. You can see my email on the first slide, and I hope you enjoy the lecture. You first might want to download the entire presentation I'm about to make. Here's the URL. Unfortunately, I think you have to write it down and then type it in order for it to work. But then if you play the slideshow, the hyperlinks that I have in the presentation will work, so you can get to all the websites. Okay, let's begin. This is a talk that I give every year at the IAJGS, and I'm really disappointed that I won't be able to see everybody, at least live this year, but hopefully we will have an Austria-Czech research group or SIG meeting sometime during the conference on Zoom so I can see everybody and say hi. As I said, it's a talk I give every year, and so the slides have been updated slightly for this presentation, and there are some new things. There's always something new going on in our field. And as you'll see, if you haven't been to one of our conferences before or seen this presentation, we have an enormous wealth of resources in our region, Austria and the Czech Republic. And so I'm going to review some of the most popular ones, but of course there's just endless resources that we have available. And I love to hear about new ones, so please send me a message if you find one. Okay, so the first stop, if you're just starting out, is going to be the JewishGen homepage. Which is at jewishgen.org. On JewishGen, you'll find things like the JewishGen Family Finder, where you can enter in all the surnames and towns that you're researching, and then you can find other people and they can find you. It's a terrific way of establishing connections. JewishGen also hosts the Austria-Czech Research Group, or formerly called the Special Interest Group, SIG. And this is our very old homepage, which we're still looking to redesign. Barry Spinack did it many years ago, and it hasn't been updated much. But you'll find a wealth of good information there. So if you go to the homepage or you find us on JewishGen, this is what you'll see. We have what I did a long time ago, 2009, the Beginner's Guide to Austrian Jewish Genealogy. Actually, that was the last time it was updated. But it is still a very thorough and detailed guide if you're just starting out in Austrian research. We also have Getting Started with Czech Jewish Genealogy, an article I wrote with Julius Müller, which has the basics of doing research in the Czech Republic, or formerly Bohemia, Moravia, and parts of Silesia. So those are two great places to get started. On JewishGen, we have an Austria-Czech database which has nearly 1 million entries, and we're adding more all the time. It's just a terrific place to get access to all of the databases that we have, including the indexes of all the Vienna Jewish records, for example. So if your family came from anywhere in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you probably have relatives that are in this database because they came to Vienna. So here we have a list of some of them. You can see they have births, deaths, marriages, also burials you'll come up with. So it's really a great place to start, or if you're looking for detailed research, you'll find it here. There's something I've been working on but haven't updated much in the last year, is a Prague Marriage Index, which is going up now, I think, until 1865, but in theory we could have all the way up to 1920 in there. So hopefully that'll get finished sometime soon. We have Art Spira's database on all of the records from the town of Trebich in Moravia. These are the type of databases that we collect, and if you're interested in doing a database for your specific town, that would be fabulous. You could donate it to JewishGen, and we could add it very easily. One of the best resources on JewishGen is, of course, JOBUR, the JewishGen Online Worldwide Burial Registry, which I believe has 3.7 million burials from 8,666 cemeteries in 130 countries right now, and that's just absolutely terrific for us. For Austria, we have 42 cemeteries, almost 160,000 burials, and 1,000 photos. In the Czech areas, we have much comparable, 109,000 burials, but from 222 cemeteries, including over 10,000, almost 11,000 photos right now. So you will find lots of things. We're constantly updating this, and the source for the cemetery data are several. One is Fred Fatal, who has come to our conference many times and was hoping to come this time also. He has an organization called Tamus, which you can hire him to photograph, document, transcribe or index all of the tombstones in a cemetery, and he's done a number of cemeteries, and he donates all of the data to JewishGen, so you can find it on JewishGen also. We have some new ones recently uploaded. The other person in this field is Yaroslav Heidler, who's documented 150 cemeteries on his site, which is chevra.com. He's just a phenomenon, and he actually transcribes the inscriptions in Hebrew and sometimes translates them. So it's a terrific website that he has. He also contributes data to JewishGen, so we have a lot of his information also on JewishGen. Here's an example from chevra.com, Heidler's website, which shows a photograph. It'll have a description of the grave and then also transcription. This is a very old one from Volhynia. So there are other websites. For example, the Jewish community in Brno has a website that's devoted to 49 Moravian cemeteries. They are not all completely indexed. Some are better than others. Some of them have site plans, which is useful sometimes. You just have to look, depending on which town, you'll have different resources, but it's a very good website to go to if you're looking for grave information. Here's an example of something that would come up, a photo of a grave of David Bash in Brno, I believe. So for Prague, we have just an enormous number of resources, and since we're talking about cemeteries, we have two indexes for what I call the middle cemetery, the old Volshan Friedhof, which is not the old cemetery, but also not the new one with Franz Kafka that everybody visits. It's a cemetery that was torn down mostly, and the graves were destroyed in order to build a radio tower in the 1980s. And fortunately, we have two cemetery books that detail the information of the people that had been buried there. Here's another one. These indexes are in the Jewish Theological Cemetery. I just checked today, and for some reason they're not available on the website today. But they've sent me copies, and you can download them from the first link over there. The first tiny URL will have links to their books, and these are very useful if you're researching in Prague. Besides JewishGen, probably the best database you could go to for Austrian and Czech Jewish research would be genteam.at or .eu, also works. This is a website hosted by Felix Gundaker, who's a genealogist in Vienna. It has, as you can see, about 8 million entries, including lots and lots of information on for Jewish genealogists, including all of the databases that you would also find on JewishGen. The search function is a little bit different. On JewishGen, you can actually search two surnames at the same time, which is very useful especially if you're searching for someone who has a common name, because then you can find a marriage, for example. But here on GenTeam, you also have terrific search capabilities, and you'll really enjoy it. I think you need to register for free in order to access the website, but it's really terrific. Just to give you an idea, as Vienna Jewish community records, but also from outlying areas like the Burgenland, Innsbruck, Eisenstadt. Some Moravian communities are on there. There's a terrific database of newspaper obituaries, which are absolutely phenomenal for genealogy. Also an index to Gerhard Gaugish's book, Wer einmal war, which has thousands and thousands of Jewish families in Vienna, and also various databases related to Prague and conversions and reconversions and things like that. You have to go to GenTeam if you're doing Austrian research. The Jewish community in Vienna has its own database for the cemetery. This is information you'll also find on GenTeam and JewishGen, but on the Vienna cemetery database, if you do it right, it used to be a little easier, but it's still possible. You can see all of the people buried in a single grave, which can be extremely helpful in finding relatives, maybe relatives you didn't know about. So I recommend people always also check here. I mentioned the collection on GenTeam of obituary notices. You can see one on the upper right here. This comes from a wonderful website from the Austrian National Library called Anno, and they have something called they have a full text search, which in German is Volltextsuche, and you can search all of the historical newspapers that they've collected for the last several hundred years. It's an amazing research. You can see on the right, if I looked for Leopold Funk, you would find not only his obituary, but below that you can see an excerpt from a newspaper in 1858, which has to do with some some debt dispute that he was in at that time. So you can really find a lot of amazing information on Anno, and I recommend it very, very highly. A while back, Peter Roll, who had his own website, which is mostly now on genie.com, he collected also obituary notices, and what he did, though, is he wrote down not just the name of the person who died, but everybody named in the obituary notice. So if you can go to this website, which I set up, and view source, because it doesn't list quite the same way now, you can search for all the people in the obituaries and not just the person who died. So it can be useful. Okay, back to Prague now. We have a database of the Prague, what's called the Prague Conscriptions database. It's sort of like a census for the city of Prague. Has over 2 million entries. Very, very useful. Mostly the names are spelled correctly, sometimes not, but you should find what you're looking for there. And they have these wonderful family pages. So you have the husband, the wife, and the kids, and birth dates, and sometimes birthplaces, sometimes marriage information. Really a gold mine of information. There is also something called the Prague Population Register, which is on the Municipal Archives website. And there, if you click on the Prague Population Register and you search, then there's a search field in the upper right there. You can usually find, again, like a census form that will have information about the family. Sometimes it has really detailed information, like on this one that shows for one of my ancestors, it shows when they moved to Vienna, for example. But you, of course, have to figure out the writing, which can be sometimes difficult, but very useful. There's also a Moravian Regional Archive in Brno, which has town census information. I'm not as familiar with this. I've only used it sporadically, but you can search for a town, find a little local census, and sometimes find terrific information. So good luck with it. It's I think only in Czech right now, but hopefully you'll be able to figure out how to navigate it and find something useful for your research. Here's another one, the Brno Population Registers. Again, these are types of census records, this time for Brno, and you can find them on this archive, digiarchive.brno.cz. It gives you an example of what you find there. This one I haven't used too much in Pilsen. In Bohemia, they also have population registers with their own website, I believe, and you can look those up and find, again, little type of registration notices, census type data. Very useful. Okay, there is for Prague and for all of Bohemia old census that were taken in 1783, 1792, 1794, 1793, etc. for Bohemia. These are available online, thanks to Professor Ivana Ebelova, who put them online, and she and her students put these together. So you can download an entire PDF and then find whole families from the late 1790s or 1780s, 1790s period. Here's an example of one of my favorites, Joachim Feigl, with his 10 sons, which is unusual. Sometimes there'll even be date information, but usually not. Usually it's by location and the family. But this is a very useful resource, and sometimes one of the earliest resources that we have for families in Bohemia. So in Prague, there is also a census from 1729. Here you see Julius Miller holding it up last fall when I was in Prague with him. Julius has managed to scan all of these, and I've put them on a website so you can actually look through that. Professor Ebelova promised me that she was working on a digital version that she would share, and hopefully that'll be available soon. But it's a real gold mine of information, that single book there, for Prague Jews at least. The old Prague Cemetery, everybody knows. I was able to visit this last fall, and here you see a picture of Daniel Polakovich, who helped me find one of my ancestors. He's been working on a database for many, many years, and asked me for a little more patience, so maybe 1 or 2 more years we'll have his excellent database, which is based on previous work by Otto Munalis, and even before that, the Hawk book and Popper, etc., from the 19th century. So he's putting together all of the information that they have, including photographs of all of the graves in the old cemetery, and we're hoping that that'll be available for research very soon. In the Prague Municipal Archives online, you can get access to something called the Liber Judaeorum Albus, which is sort of the Jewish White Book. In Czech, it's Židovská kniha Bílá, which is what you have to search. And these are sort of official record books of the government about Jewish transactions, loans and disputes and things like that came into the Prague Castle. And so here you see an example of that from 1614. So if you're lucky enough to have family in Prague and you can read the old Czech handwriting, then you can sometimes find some really terrific information. So the Jewish Museum in Prague, I mentioned I visited them. They also have a terrific website. Here's a link to part of their library, which is now being scanned, and all these old pamphlets and things that are available. They also have, for example, the best records for Mikulov, Nikolsburg, which is the largest community in Moravia. You can find that all online only at the Jewish Museum of Prague website, not on the other records for Czech Jews, which I'll talk about later. You can also search people because, of course, they're indexing things constantly. And so when you have, if you can look for a name, you can find things sometimes in their website that way. They have, for example, old collections sometimes from old communities outside of Prague, like this one from Holešov, which is a Pinkas or community book from 1668 to 1731, and you can find this online at the Prague Jewish Museum website. They also have, as I mentioned, Leopold Popper's index to the old cemetery in Prague, which is very, very useful. And I believe there's another talk at the conference that will discuss this. We have also at Jewish Museum of Prague an inventory of various towns and records for each town. You can find that also. So you can find if your particular town, not just Prague, but all over Bohemia, Moravia, has records in the Jewish community, Jewish Museum archives in Prague, which is where everything was brought and collected. So it's very useful. We're still missing a lot of information for Prague. The 1748 Prague census has been published, but we don't have it in digital form, so it's really hard to access that unless you have the book. There's a reference to Rabbi Ezekiel Landau made some sort of index card of the whole community, and that's somehow missing in Prague. There's also supposed to be registers of deaths, marriage permissions, and testaments. These are all in the municipal archives, which has apparently 200 or more boxes of Jewish records that they will not let anybody look at. When I was there with Julius Miller, we asked, and they said, no, you can't look at them unless they're indexed, and we know what's in them. We said, well, can we look inside and help you figure out what it is and whether it's worth indexing? And they said no. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. I've asked Lenka Matuskova to look into it, and she can't get anywhere with the head of that municipal archive. Apparently they're holding on to it. They may end up loaning all the items to the Jewish Museum of Prague and have the Jewish Museum in Prague go through it. But at the moment, they will not give us any access to these 200 boxes, only a few of them that they've actually opened up and looked at, which is very sad. In the National Archives, there are also a lot of unscanned and unindexed records, Jewish records, including marriage permissions, genealogy charts, and things like that. So there's just a lot of resources still to be had in Prague. I believe also I saw records in Prague for marriages in the rest of Bohemia. In other words, where people had to write for permission back to Prague. And so even if your family isn't from Prague, there may be some records there from the outlying communities as well. Here's an example of something they have at the Jewish Museum archives. It's a marriage, basically a marriage record on this pre-printed form. They call it a fassion, and it shows the bride and the parents of the bride, which are very important for genealogy, obviously. This is one from 1760. We do not yet have access to these, and I'm hoping they get scanned. Here's another marriage permission, this time from the National Archives where I found it. It was not easy to find. But if you have the date, sometimes you can look through the records and they do appear. So here's one that I was able to find from 1760. So going out of Prague now, there's a project which I looked at the website yesterday and it's changed a little bit. There's not quite the same look and feel, but it is for Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia, Judaica. It has very old records from the 17th century for a number of different communities. You have to write them and then pay for access, and that's how they fund their research. But if you're looking for deep records, sometimes they're not so useful. It'll just say Hirsch, son of Joseph, and things like that, and you really can't link them up to anybody. But if you're looking for deep records, this is where they are. You can do rare book searches on the website I set up, Hugo Gold. There's also the Freimann-Sammlung in Frankfurt, and then I have a Dropbox folder also of rare books and articles which you can gather from these various websites. I recommend them all to you. It's too much to describe what's all there. You have to look and explore for yourself. One example, though, you can find, for example, on hugogold.com, and this is searchable, and on that website you can find, for example, Viennese Jewish estate records, which have been published over 100 years ago, and sometimes that's a good way of finding something you didn't know, because it'll have witnesses and all sorts of names in these. The Hugo Gold books, which are really the main sources, really was the first source that most of us had on our ancestral homes. These are books published in 1929 and 1934 by Hugo Gold on Bohemia and Moravia. They have a chapter on each Jewish community, sometimes very detailed information, just depending on who put the chapter together. And you can find that also on hugogold.com. Okay, so the big news, when you say what's new, is that apparently the Czech Jewish records that we've all been accessing on a website called badatelna.eu will be removed and migrated to a different website that the National Archives has put together called Vademecum. And that's going to cause a lot of problems, because a lot of us have been working with the old records now for 5 years, which was the last time they changed the entire website. And we have links to these, especially those of us who are using Genie, always put links to the Badatelna records. These are all going to be lost in a way, and so it's very, very sad for us. But we all have to learn, I guess, to use the new website, which doesn't have everything that's on Badatelna yet. So I'm hoping that happens before everything is taken down. So if you're looking for something, get it while you can on Badatelna. Otherwise, you're going to have to learn to use the new website. So here's what we have on Badatelna. This is the Register of Jewish Religious Communities, which is Fond 1073. That has a lot of the record books for various towns in Bohemia and Moravia. You have to click on Inventar, and then it gives you a list of towns, and you click on the little plus symbol, and it opens up, and you can then see all of the records. N is for births, O is for marriages, Z is for deaths. There's sometimes index books also. We just have an enormous collection of resources here available. Here's an example. You do have to read the record when you find it. So here's one from the town of Kojetín in Moravia, and it's a birth record from 1790. And believe it or not, it says Rosal Löwenthal. Here's an example from the Prague birth register that shows that we have a really nice index, so you can search alphabetically by year and really find people. It's really a fabulous book. I wish someone would index it, but it has not yet been indexed electronically. Then there's a second group called the control registers. These are sort of parish registers that were copies of the Jewish record books. It's Fond 241 on Badatelna. I don't think this is yet on Vademecum. The first one is, and we'll get to how to access that in a second, but I'm not sure these are. This is the Familianten books that people are familiar with, I hope. These are the records mainly for Bohemia and Prague of all the Jewish families spanning the time frame, what is it, 1780 to 1850 time frame usually, and it'll show the marriage permissions, and then the kids, sometimes only the male ones, I guess mostly the male sons, but it's obviously one of our main record collections. We have also a register of marriages in Bohemia and Prague. This is available also on Badatelna, and it is extremely useful for deep research because these records go back sometimes into the 1730s, if you can find something useful. And what I find interesting is that the women are usually from another place, or very often from another place. You can see this example from the town of Brandeis, the second column of names. Wherever you see that little V or W and then another word, that's usually a town. So the women are coming from other towns to marry husbands in the town, which I think is very interesting to see. Okay, so here's this Vademecum website that I am just getting used to. We're all getting used to it. It's not necessarily so easy. It has some advantages over Badatelna, but some disadvantages too. And so here's what you find when you go to the main page. I guess there's supposed to be an English version, but I'm not sure it's working yet. Right under that white box at the top, under Archivni Vademecum, is where you do the searches. And here's a great description from Brian Blitz of how to find that Fond 1073 from Badatelna, all those basic record books from Bohemia and Moravia. You type Żydowski Matryki in that search bar, and then the fourth item is the one you want, these records from 1784 to 1949. And you click on that, and then you get to another page, which you may be able to use this link to get to. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and then you're going to get a gray box with two maroon icons to the right, and you click on the top one, which says Listovani v Pomoce, and then this brings you to an index of books in the font, which seems to be 1073. So here's an example of that in the lower part of this slide. You have over on the right, when you click on the name of the town, up pops this little picture of a mountain with a sun or moon next to it, and that's what you want to click on to get to the actual records. And from there, it's a little bit self-explanatory. It's that little picture of the record on the left of this slide. So not easy, but hopefully you'll figure it out, and we'll keep using it. You can do permalinks supposedly from all the pages you find here, so that'll be useful. And the resolution, the size and resolution is better than we had on Badatelna. So take a look at that. Here's an example of what you find then. So you can have sort of a full page, which is nice. Okay. So there are other archives now besides the National Archive in Prague. There's the Opava archives. Again, they've changed their website a little bit. You select Matryki and search for Žydé on this. Hopefully you'll be able to figure it out. I figured out yesterday where Matryki is, but now it's not on this page, I think. But anyway, hopefully you'll figure out how to get to that. From there, you can find sometimes Jewish records that are in the back of Christian parish books. Here's one for my family. It's just 2 pages in the back of an otherwise all Christian book that's 200 pages long, and it's in the very back. They have the Jewish registers. There's a list of these type of records made by Felix Gundaker, which is on the Jewish Gen Austria-Czech website. You can access that, so you can find out if your tiny village doesn't have a Jewish record book. Your family may be in the Christian records for that town. This is another regional archive, this time in Trebon, and works sort of the same way. You gotta figure out how to navigate it, search it, and then you'll find records like this, Book of Inheritance for Myslkovice, and things like that. So you can find Jewish records in these regional archives, and they're starting to scan them and make them available, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to get there. Okay, so switching gears now over to Family Search, which is the Mormon website based in Utah, in Salt Lake City. They've made a number of records available to us by scanning the old Jewish records in Vienna and putting them on their website. Not all of the ones that they scanned are on the website because there were some privacy restrictions on various films, so they haven't been able to do all of it. But the things you might find on GenTeam or JewishGen, the records that are indexed, the actual records you might be able to find here on FamilySearch. And this is the website to that collection. So it gives you an idea of this is a marriage record here, for example, from Vienna. So it gives great detail on the parents and place of birth and various things like that, sometimes birthdays. You have death registers also, which is on FamilySearch for Vienna, so that's very, very useful, obviously. There's also Czech census on FamilySearch, almost 5 million images. These are obviously not just Jewish records, so you have to look for your village, your town, in the list of districts, and then so you have to go by district and then by town inside the district, and if you're lucky you'll find something like this. This is from Budweis, from České Budějovice, so it's sometimes the best record that you can find. So there are also something called Grundbuchblätter, which are for people who are owning or renting property. They have records of all of these things. These are collected by FamilySearch and made available. This one is for Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia, but I think the location of it is in Vienna, or the microfilm that they made was in Vienna. So these can be very, very useful if you can navigate it. Here's Ludwig Abeles from Kamenitze. Okay, I mentioned Julius Müller before. He has his own website. He's the best genealogist we have in the Czech Republic right now, and his website is toledo.org. He has a wealth of materials on that website, including an index of the surnames in the Familianten books that we talked about earlier. Here's an example of that. He has some various records that he's dug up, for example, from Schafa. One of the things I really like going to his website for is this map of Bohemia and Moravia, because it's an old map with the old district regions, and these correspond usually to the census, for example, in 1793. So if you're trying to figure out which book of the census to look in, you have to figure out sort of where the town is and then match it up to the region as it was back in the olden days. It's not so easy sometimes. What might make it easier for you to locate towns, though, is Alex Kalzareth's brilliant website, which he's had to sort of change the format of, but it's a map website basically that maps out the available records and cemeteries in Bohemia and Moravia. It's all sort of color-coded, so if you go to his website and you can search, you have to, I think, click on that in the right above the map there in the upper right. There's like a full screen thing. You have to click on that, and then you can type in search a name of a village, and it'll go to that place, and then you can see what records are nearby. Often the main records are kept separate from or kept in a different location from the town that you find on some other record. So let's say someone dies in Vienna, and you say that he says there's from a town, a little tiny town in Bohemia. You look for that town on the Czech Jewish registers. It's not there. So how would you find out where his birth is recorded? Well, you can go to this website and see if there's one of these circles nearby that shows a larger town where the record books were kept, and that's where you can look for the records. So Alex, thank you very much again for this invaluable resource. I use it all the time. Here's another page you need to go to figure out town names sometimes, because you'll see them in German, and now they're Czech. And how do you find them on the Czech websites? You go to this Wikipedia page, and it'll have the old German names and the new Czech names. Okay, so here's a website I haven't explored too much. It is a digital library that is built by the Moravian Library in Brno, but it includes a lot of other small regional libraries and archives, and obviously they've scanned lots of books and newspapers and pamphlets and all sorts of interesting things, and you can do full text search on these just like you would with that Anno website in Vienna. So it's a great resource. If you're researching victims of the Holocaust, you want to go to holocaust.cz, which is the best website that we have for that. It's a group in Prague that have been going through all of the records and for each victim putting all the various information, all about the transports that they were on, whether the person lived or not, and then any records that they find, often with photographs, they attach. So you really need to look here for anybody who was living in that time frame and was unfortunate enough to be caught up in the Holocaust. There's another database with Terezin inmates that were deported actually to Lodz and Minsk. So you can search here on that one. It's a little bit different. They have different records. I want to give a little plug to Geni right now. Most of us in this group are now very active on Geni and building our family trees, and that's because we have great records and we can put our trees together. And it turns out that we're just all pretty closely related. All our trees intersect somewhat. So I guarantee if you are from this Austria-Czech region, if you build out your tree on Geni, I guarantee that if you can't do it yourself, I or someone else will do it for you. You will be connected to everybody else and closely connected to everybody else, cousin of cousin of cousin at the most. And you'll be able to find that on Geni. The advantage is you don't have to reinvent the wheel and do all the work yourself. We all work collaboratively there. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle where everybody's working on the same puzzle. And of course, as we go back hundreds of years in this area, everybody really is related to everybody else. And so you can see that on Geni. So please go there. For various communities, we have projects on Geni, which will give you information on how to find the records, where to find the records, and you'll also find other researchers who are researching those towns. It's just a great way of collaborating and learning more about genealogy in this area. Here's an example of one project that I've worked on a lot, which is the Jewish Families from Prague. I have over 300 family names. You can link to the family trees and find the people. It also lists where you can find all the data, all the various resources. It's just a sort of like a Wikipedia page for this project, Jewish Families from Prague. And I encourage everybody to work on projects for their towns, because the more we do, the easier it is for other people to find us, and the easier it is for all of us when we go and want to look for something. We have a project on Geni also for Theresienstadt Ghetto. We are up to 35,000 names, so we're still building steadily. But obviously have a long way to go. So if you have family members and your tree is on Geni, you can add them to the Theresienstadt project as long as they're deceased in public. They can all be added, and you can join this project also. Beit Theresienstadt has an archive that is online. I checked a little bit today, and you can maybe find things. It's mainly sort of an index, and then you can write to them to see what they have on your relative. But this is a kibbutz in Israel that has a whole museum on Theresienstadt and a wonderful archives that was put together by all the survivors who came to Israel. Back in Austria now, Johannes Reiss and Traudl Triebel have put together this website. Well, Johannes runs the Austrian Jewish Museum in Eisenstadt, which I recommend to everybody. I visited it last year, and it's absolutely amazing. Not just a beautiful cemetery, but also the old Jewish town hall and an old chapel that you can visit with a terrific exhibit. Johannes puts up a blog when he finds something interesting that he works on, and his interest is really in these old grave inscriptions. He came to the Cleveland conference and lectured on that. And so you can find on his blog lots of information about various families in that area, in the Burgenland area, which is sort of the border between Austria and Hungary with Eisenstadt, Mattersburg, but he also goes down to Trieste and works there as well. Okay, National Library of Israel. We've had a project to scan a lot of the information from this, and there are a lot of items related to the Austria-Czech areas, which we've scanned. You can see sort of a Excel spreadsheet of those, an example. You can find a lot of the scanned items on their archive website if you can navigate it. If not, you can go to the Dropbox folder that I've set up that has a lot of these. But they're very interesting. A lot of it in Hebrew, which I'm not so great at, so we're hoping that people will go through and start indexing some of these. We've had some success this year with volunteers, and if you're interested in indexing any of these, please contact me. In Vienna, there's a cemetery, not the oldest cemetery, but sort of the middle cemetery again, the Währinger Friedhof, which is mainly in the 19th century, and there was transcriptions of the graves that were made by Pincus Heinrich. We have copies of those transcriptions from the Central Archives in Jerusalem, and those are available through the hyperlink on this page. Georg Gaugusch is probably the best genealogist in the world, certainly the best for us, and he has published now volume 2 of the 3-volume set Wer einmal war, which is all about the haute bourgeoisie, the sort of wealthy Jewish families in Vienna. He's taken hundreds of these and meticulously documented their genealogies with more detail than you would find in pretty much any other genealogy. And I recommend the books to you if you can find them. The third one hopefully will come out in the next year or two, and the project will be completed. We have something new now, the Prague post-war death declarations. These have been compiled by Lenka Matuskova, who's come and lectured to us many times from the Prague National Archives. She has gone through these post-war declarations and indexed them. It's not complete yet, but it's getting there, and I recommend that you search this if you're interested, again, in people who were alive or maybe survived or did not survive the Holocaust. You'll find records for them here that you haven't seen before. These are brand new. Also new this year is a website devoted to what they call translocation plans of Jewish residences in the lands of the Bohemian Crown. These are old maps from various villages, and the maps also include lists of Jews living in the village. So you'll see these beautiful drawn pictures of the village and the layout of the village, and then a list of the Jews who are living there. It's they say 1727 to 1728. There's some also older ones and newer ones that are linked to that, and it's an exciting new resource for those of us researching in those areas. It seems to be mostly Moravian, I think, but maybe some Bohemian also. So here's some pictures from my recent trip to Prague last year, and I was able, thanks to Julius Müller and Lenka Matuskova and Daniel Polakovich and Thomas Gregor at the Jewish Museum, to visit a lot of the archives and see things that are not yet scanned. So, for example, from the Prague Municipal Archives, you could find this several-page document listing Prague marriages. It's basically the permissions that are given for marriages on that date, and it's 6, 7, 8 pages of marriages in Prague. I found one of these in the Municipal Archives, and also one identical one from a few years later in the National Archives. So these are somehow split up, but obviously very valuable information. Here's Thomas Krakora, who's archivist or assistant archivist in Jewish Museum in Prague, showing me something called the Berichtenbuch, Prague Berichtenbuch, which was a sort of Jewish community ledger that lists sort of all the activities, and it's has some interesting things. I had found a citation to it and wanted to see what it was about. And so this is something that's not yet available scanned, but you could visit Prague and read through it. They also have, as I mentioned earlier, archives or archival documents, records from various communities in Bohemia, Moravia. This one is the Moravian village of Uherské Ostro, or Ungarisch Ostro. It's a 1728 census from that village. And this led me to this archive led me actually to discover an archive in Vienna that I'm going to talk about in a second. Here is the National Archives, or there are actually two National Archives. This is the one in Mladi Horakova, which Lenka Matuskova works at. There she is, next to my cousin Michaela in the picture. Lenka's in the front. And she showed me something called the Totenbeschau-Zettel, which is, it's not really a coroner's report because it doesn't really have too much about the death, but it's sort of like what a police record of death or a coroner's record of death might look like. And she has lots of these for Prague, and she was able to search and find one for my relative. So there are a lot of genealogical records in the National Archives that we don't yet have digital access to, and you can get that if you visit Prague. So I mentioned that Ostro record referred me to Liechtenstein. The Liechtenstein family actually owned the town of Ostro in Moravia, and so they have, as well as the town of Prosnitz, and so they have records that are sort of like a business file. Imagine you ran the town as a business, and they have Jewish records about everything the Jews needed permission for: opening up a butcher shop, bringing in a new rabbi, passing statutes and laws and things like that. Those were all recorded and then sent to the Liechtenstein family, and they have their princely collection in Vienna in this beautiful palace. And you find amazing things from the early 1700s, late 1600s. I've actually hired some people to scan these records, and hopefully that'll be finished by the end of the summer. But here you see sort of signatures of the Jews in the town of Prosnitz. Pretty neat with their wax seals. Here's similar for Ostro. So they'll have sort of records of these are the people who are given positions sort of in the government of the Jews in Ostro, sort of the advisors and the elders of the town. I went to Vienna and visited the city archives, which are for a long time now in the gasometer. Here's a picture of it, and wouldn't you know, I always run into people. I used to run into our late friend Celia Mail when I went in here, and this time I ran to Daniel Horowitz and his friend Daniela. They were doing research. They had come from Israel to do research and just happened to be there on the same day that I was in the archives. So it's you never know who you're going to meet when you go into the archives, but usually it's a friend. I found something I didn't know about in Vienna, which was an index to Prague records that had been made by Leon Ruzicka, and I haven't yet found the source, but these are tax records that are in Vienna, but about Prague families. So you have to keep searching, and I guess you'll find. But this is a card catalog that I found right in that room there. You just open it up and read it and scan it. I had come there to look at this called the Kartei der Fremden, which is not so easy to use. It's got a weird phonetic ordering, but it has you can get microfilm and then find your family if they came from somewhere else to Vienna. There's a page for them, and it says where they're from and all sorts of information about the family. Okay, so a plug now for Facebook groups. There's a Czech Jewish Genealogy Facebook group that was started up recently by Ray Minkus, and it's really good, and we all talk there all the time. And if you're on Facebook, you definitely should join it if you're interested in Czech Jewish genealogy. There's also a Czech Jewish Cemetery Facebook group, which is mainly for photographers who go on the weekends and then their free time to Jewish cemeteries and take sort of artsy photos. But occasionally they take photos that are good enough for us to read and use for our genealogy, so it's worth looking at. There's a general Czech genealogy Facebook group, which has some really helpful people. If you're having difficulty navigating those archive websites, for example, this is the place to go. I was not able to find that parish book when they changed the website, the one that had my Jewish family in the back, and I got a lot of good help from people here, so I recommend that group highly. And lastly, I think we're at the end. It's DNA, which everybody loves to talk about. We don't talk about it enough, I think, for our group, because we need more examples of male line DNA. That's Y-DNA, the one that's passed down father to son for our Bohemian and Moravian and Prague Jewish families. I've set up projects. We have some members, but I've been going around and trying to sort of go up my family tree and then back down to try to find male line members, people with the surnames that I'm searching for, and testing their Y-DNA. And I think we'll be able to learn quite a bit about the origins of our particular community that way. But we need a lot more work on that area, and hopefully if you have still an old surname from Bohemia, Moravia, you should be testing your Y-DNA and joining if you're a male, or you find some other male family member. But you can do that with all your surnames by going up and back down your trees, and I hope everybody will do that. Okay, I think we're at the end. You can download this presentation. I hope the link works, and if it doesn't, just send me an email, find me, and I'll try to fix it somehow. Thank you very much for attending the presentation. You can Please remember, they say, to evaluate the session using the mobile app, whatever that is going to be. And there's all my contact information. You can find me by email, on Genie, all over the place. You can find me. So hopefully we'll all be together next year, wherever that is. And hopefully this year I'll see everybody on Zoom if we have our SIG meeting. Goodbye, everyone.